Good evening, everyone. I'd like to open the meeting and welcome everyone to this ordinary meeting of Council for Tuesday, the 12th of June 2018. On behalf of the City of Moonee Valley, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We also extend this respect to Aboriginals and Torres Strait Island people that may be here with us tonight. I advise the members of the gallery that open session of this meeting are being recorded and live streamed on the internet. The recordings will be archived and made available on Council's website. Gallery attendees are advised that their presence may be recorded tonight as well. Councillors, apologies. I can confirm that we have two apologies. We have one from Councillor Cusack, has been granted leave of absence for tonight's ordinary meeting, and we also have Councillor Gauci Marucci has been granted leave of absence from Council until the 24th of June 2018. But I'd also like to make a special mention that Councillor Gauci Marucci had a little baby girl just recently, and her name is Lucinda Odette Teresa Marucci. So congratulations to our colleague for having a wonderful little baby. Councillors, I do believe we don't have any other apologies tonight, so we'll go straight into the meeting. Confirmation of minutes. Councillors, do I have any opposition to any item on the minutes for the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday the 22nd of May 2018? As councillors, there is no objection to the minutes. I can confirm that the minutes are confirmed. Councillors, do I have a mover and a seconder to rectify the minutes? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Serace, seconded. The minutes are confirmed. All those in favour?
Just as a point of clarification,
sure.
I just wanted to confirm what the motion was, whether we're rectifying or we're just moving that the minutes be accepted.
We're moving the minutes are being accepted. Yeah. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. The minutes are declared confirmed. Declaration by councillors. Does any councillor have any conflict of interest in any item on tonight's agenda? Councillor Sharp.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Report 9.5, draft footpath trading policy, and report 9.11, the response to notice of motion footpath trading due to my workplace.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor have any conflict of interest? No? Thank you. Presentations. Councillors, do we have any presentations this evening? Councillor Nation.
Yes, Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to present you with our highly commended award in the local government category from the Helping Achieve Reconciliation Together Awards. Council was shortlisted as a finalist for our new ceremonial rock circle at 5 Mile Creek in Essendon and received the highly commended award at the awards ceremony held by Reconciliation Victoria and the Victorian Local Governance Association. I was honoured to attend and accept this award alongside 3 Indigenous Council staff members, and as we start to prepare an updated reconciliation action plan, this award is testament to the great work being done by Council in this space.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Nation, I'd just like to thank you for attending on my behalf as I wasn't able to attend this, and thank you very much for accepting this award on behalf of Council. Petitions and joint letters. Are there any petitions and joint letters, councillors? No? Questions from public. Mr Lancaster, do we have any questions from the public?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There are no questions tonight from the public.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go straight into council reports. Council report 9.1 on tonight's agenda is on page 5 and relates to a planning application at 7 Garnet Street, West Essendon. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Serace. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll be pretty brief on this one because I think that it is somewhat, well, it's an extremely compliant application. You were at the consultation meeting that we had for this one, and we had quite cooperative residents and the applicant in the meeting, and I feel like through the conditions we were able to help out what the main objections were. And as you would probably remember, one of the main, first of all, I'll just talk briefly on what the application is for. 883 square metres, 4 double-storey, 3 3-bedders, 1 2-bedder, compliant with car parking. Yes, on 883 square metres. two of the main things that were brought up was the roof line, with it being a skillion roof, and the traffic implications that having 4 dwellings on one block would have. Through a condition, we were able, the applicant actually put in new plans to change the roof, so we were able to fix that. That neighbourhood character question. In terms of the traffic, that's something that us as a council, we need to obviously work on. It's a school area, there's lots of schools around there's no doubt about that. And it is a busy street when you live sort of wedged between 2 schools. That's not the applicant's issue per se, if they've provided the adequate car parking. Interestingly enough, there wasn't too many queries asked on the overshadowing. It is noted that from one dwelling on one side there is very slight overshadowing in the morning, but that wasn't too contentious. So I think that with the fixing of the roof, with it being an extremely compliant application, and knowing previously, I do want to compare this slightly to the one on Beryl Street. Beryl Street I fought quite hard for and said that 4 was inappropriate. It's very close by, but it is a one-way street, and I feel like that's the difference between Garnet and Beryl and this one. And I feel like that if the residents were to take this, or if we were to take this to VCAT, or if it was to end up in VCAT, they would allow 4 dwellings on 883 squares. It's simple as that. So happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Serace.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Whilst I wasn't present at the deputation, I'm guided by my fellow ward councillors and the officer's recommendation. I think Councillor Byrne has covered all those points, and the recommendation that says that there will be a change to the pitch roofing, and obviously the traffic situation, it is what it is. So I'm happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to speak say a few words? Councillor Byrne, would you like to close? Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Council Report 9.2 on tonight's agenda is on page 33 and is entitled Disability Services Tender. Councillors, do I have a motion?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move an alternative.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Yeah, ready, yeah.
Thank you. With the proposed motion being that Council 1 registers to become a National Disability Insurance Scheme provider, NDIS provider. 2 provides a report to Council every 6 months detailing the provision of NDIS commencing to clients post-implementation of the NDIS, commencing October 2018. 3 continues to look for efficiencies in service provision while maintaining the current standard of client care. 4 continues to support residents with a disability who are eligible under HAC PYP while in receipt of ongoing state government funding. 5, as an NDIS provider, Council will feed back to the National Disability Insurance Agency to support improvements to the scheme. 6, consult with service recipients and their carers/families, including relevant Council portfolio advisory committees, about opportunities and future roles for Council to support people with a disability in Moonee Valley, aligning to the goals of Council's Disability Action Plan. 7, communicates the decision to become an NDIS provider with current HAC PYP star clients, the Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS, and the local disability sector.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marshall will second that. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Mayor, I'll just foreshadow a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is the new way of providing support for Australians with a disability, their families and carers. It will provide 500,000 Australians under the age of 65 with a permanent and significant disability with the reasonable and necessary supports that they need to live an ordinary life. It is critical that as a council we ensure that our residents are not left in a worse position when NDIS is rolled out in Moonee Valley in October this year. Realistically, we are talking about some of the most vulnerable people in our municipality. As a ratepayer, I'll be proud to know that my rates will be going to subsidised services for these people if needed, if it was to provide the best outcome for them. Unfortunately, in recent times, the funding, the wait times and the quality of the NDIS system and service providers has been questioned, mainly in areas where it has already been rolled out. In one way, Moonee Valley is fortunate that we are one of the last areas to go. We can definitely learn from other mistakes. Saying that, I'm not necessarily convinced that the NDIS has been set up to favour councils as service providers. To make it work, it will cost money. I'm not doubting that, but as a council, we need to advocate strongly on behalf of the residents to ensure there are exceptional service providers in the area and potentially be one of those services as it is, if it is not as we have previously been. So many things seem to be getting privatised recently and not very many have been successful. The reason why I'm not moving the officer's recommendation tonight is because it would be absolutely horrible for anybody with a disability and their carers for us to come out loudly and say that we are not signing up for the NDIS, then for there to be no one in the market with an appropriate experience, skills or compassion to look after people already struggling. What are they supposed to do? What if there is no one? We don't know yet. Do people actually think that is acceptable? This is a service we've been providing to many people for many years. These families do not need the extra layer of worrying. Let's be proactive, fill the potential gap, and if people want to transition to another service provider, that's fine. But for people who want their same carer that they have had for 20 years, I'm not going to be the one saying no. So I'm not ready to pull the pin on NDIS yet. It may indeed be the way to go, as juggling between advocating for services and being a service provider will be extremely difficult. I know that this decision will be scrutinised heavily and no doubt debated in this chamber hotly tonight. But I want to be able to sit here knowing that I have a thorough understanding of the potential implications of the NDIS and knowing that as a councillor, I'm trying to back up some of the most vulnerable people in the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marshall.
I'm rising to speak in support of the motion, and I certainly acknowledge that this is a difficult decision, and anyone who thinks otherwise doesn't understand the gravity of the decision. And it's difficult because, as Councillor Byrne touched on, what we are dealing with in this situation is people who have a disability and people who, for a whole range of reasons, including their disability, are particularly vulnerable. And this is a decision about whether we as a council remove ourselves as a safety blanket while there is such a state of flux. I certainly acknowledge that we provide a relatively small amount of services in this space, but for me, one of the real issues which Councillor Byrne touched on is that this is a situation at the moment that just has moving parts. It really does. And it is incredibly difficult to actually predict what will happen and how this will play out in Moonee Valley. And we've seen this firsthand. We went out to tender, if you like, and we had expectations around how that might play out, and our expectations weren't met. So, and that's again, to me, that highlights that level of unpredictability and uncertainty that we currently have. And I think I keep on reflecting on what it means if we just get out of this space, we pull out, we say, no, we're not doing anything, and we leave it to private providers, what that could mean for people who need quality care in Moonee Valley. And we don't know whether in 6, 12, 18 months that a private provider will turn around after getting off to this wonderful initial start and turn around and say, you know what, I actually can't make $1 out of providing this service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop providing that service, and where does that leave the individuals concerned? It's not unknown for individuals or organisations that are seeking to make a profit to be driven by that financial imperative rather than high quality, high level service provision. Even in the not-for-profit space, there are lots of examples of not-for-profits perhaps not providing services or not acting in a way that you perhaps may otherwise expect. My concern again is thinking, all right, if we get out of this space now, what happens if it does all turn bad in 6, 12, 18 months, if we then have to look at trying to almost re-engineer the infrastructure and the staff needed to step into that breach, because people will turn around and they will point their finger at council and they will say to us, what are you doing to help fix that? And we know that because we see it in a whole range of other areas. We certainly have had information around the discrepancy in salaries between private providers and council staff. And you know, when you don't pay your staff well, it's not surprising that you have high levels of turnover. And that's one of the great things that we have. We have a stable workforce and a committed workforce who provide incredibly high quality care. And if I had a family member or if I myself had a disability, I would want well-trained, well-paid people performing those services. And I'd certainly want, going along with that, is the concern that you sometimes have where you don't have staff that are well trained or well paid, which is that turnover. And, you know, I wouldn't like to think that someone different might be rocking up to a door every week, because you don't have that opportunity and that ability to actually form relationships, because this goes just beyond just providing a service in so many ways. I will ask for a short extension of time, Mayor. I'm not far off. That's all right. So for me, in a situation where I think we would all acknowledge there is lots of uncertainty, there are lots of moving parts, I think that the prudent thing to do is actually just pause and just maintain the status quo for now. The motion put up puts a feedback mechanism in there. So we pause, we keep doing what we're doing, and then if things play out a particular way, so if everyone decides, you know what, no, not interested in council services, then we can manage that as we go along. But just to pull the rug out from underneath people's feet at the moment when there is so much uncertainty in the space, it's not something that I in good conscience can do. I think we need to hold our nerve, wait, see how this transition plays out, and regularly review it in the process. I have to say too, and again this was a point touched on, yep, and I am literally 10 seconds away. It's something that Councillor Byrne touched on. We commit to spending $50 million on leisure centres and $5, $6, $7 million on pavilions. The idea that we will be so focused on dollars to not think that we should be there to provide services for people who this might be the only interaction they have with council. This might be the only...
I'm going to have to wind you up, Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other councillor would like to speak to this item? Councillor Byrne, would you like to close?
Well, as it sounds as though there's no opposition, I don't need to. But thank you, Councillor Marshall, for your lovely comments.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? The motion has failed. Councillor Nation, would you like to put up your motion?
I'll move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm moving the officer's recommendation, and I'm confident that this is the best step forward for those in our municipality that we currently provide services for. Over the past 18 months, Council has completed a thorough analysis of this sector, including community consultation, a review of our responsibilities as a local government authority, a risk analysis, and a financial analysis. Council has reviewed and considered all options and tested the market through a tender process to ensure we have done our due diligence prior to this final recommendation. The community consultation was a 3-month process, which also engaged the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity and Access Portfolio Advisory Committee, of which I chair. This pack provides Council with an input from individuals with a lived experience with a disability, and in particular, the pending impacts and concerns associated with the implementation of the NDIS. The feedback Council received was that there were serious concerns about the NDIS, particularly from those that were not eligible. There was also concerns about where to find information about the NDIS and how to access and navigate the NDIS. For us as a council, it is vital that we continue to have an active support role for residents that are transitioning to the NDIS. It is critical that we provide an ongoing and proactive approach to providing information, advocacy and referral services for our community members with a disability. It is important we safeguard Moonee Valley's stewardship role as a local government authority in this space, and it is vital that we provide a safety net for the most vulnerable members of our community by continuing to provide support through the state government-funded Home and Community Care Program for younger persons. This safety net is critically important. The recommendation before us seeks to ensure that Council will commit to supporting those residents who are eligible for the NDIS to access all of the support services they need to live as independently as possible within their homes, while accessing all this community has to offer. Council will be there to see residents through this transition. Beyond that, though, are the approximately 40% of our most vulnerable clients who, through this reform, will not be eligible for the NDIS and who may be at risk of falling through the gaps. It is clearly our role at a local government level to ensure that our most vulnerable, including those with mental health conditions, will be safeguarded and supported to receive the services they need. Council needs to be this safety net for individuals who are not eligible for the NDIS. And it is equally important that Council plays a role in watching how the NDIS is implemented in this community. It is important that we are there to provide information, support, and if gaps in service provision are identified, that we work with the community to advocate for these needs to be met. Under the Local Government Act, our role is clear. At the end of the day, we are here to ensure the needs of our entire community are supported. And for me, personally, being the safety net for our most vulnerable is a critical commitment that I support through this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to say a few words? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just quickly, whilst I first concur with everything that Councillor Nation has just spoken about, but we really need to keep in mind that the NDIS is changing the way that we care for the disabled operates. The NDIS is effectively a complete overhaul of the previous system, which allows people to be able to choose their own provider. Council's not a specialist in the area of disability. Currently, we offer services to 242 people with disabilities within our municipality. Through the adoption of this recommendation, it will provide for those under NDIS to be able to choose a provider that works for them. Council has quite rigid timeframes for appointments and does not work after hours. People will be able to choose a provider that visits them at the times they need and is cost effective. Importantly, as Councillor Nation mentioned, the most vulnerable residents who may fall through the cracks of NDIS will continue to be supported by Council through the continuation of the HACC PYP program. It is expected that Council will continue to provide support to around 100 residents who will not be supported through any other mechanism. So I think that I'm very confident that this recommendation is the way to go and is the right outcome for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Would any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Nation, would you like to...
No, sorry, both put our hand up.
Sorry,
Do you wanna-
someone want to say something?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burke.
Well, we've got a packed gallery here tonight, but I hope the people who are listening online know what they're listening to, because honestly, I'm not sure whether it's because the councillors may not necessarily understand.
Councillor, please refer...
Point of order. Point of order.
Yep.
Please don't make judgments at what councillors believe or don't believe.
Can I just clarify what I'm saying? So, because when you're talking about the safety net of the most vulnerable people falling through, I don't think you can say that the people who aren't eligible for NDIS are more vulnerable than the people who are eligible.
Councillor, just keep going on, but please refrain from referring to what councillors might think.
Well, it's what they said, so I'm more than...
Well,
I can debate that.
If you say that...
Point of clarification. So people who, if I, through you...
I'm listening.
It would be something that the officers, I believe, would be best placed. So people who do not qualify for NDIS, but people who would qualify for HACC. So
I understand what you're saying, Councillor, but the point of order...
No, it wasn't a point of order, it was a point of clarification.
Point of clarification was... Councillor Byrne...
actually said it.
No, but I'm just referring to the original one. Is
Oh, was
Councillor
there
Byrne
oh, sorry.
referred to what...
I didn't realise there was a point of clarification on foot.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Is what councillor... She was referring to what councillors were thinking, which is not the correct phrase, but what councillors
Sorry, no, that's fine.
might have
Said?
said is a different
Sorry,
story.
what the councillors said in regards to the
Said,
safety
yes,
net.
correct.
I wanted to clarify, and maybe it is easier with Councillor Marshall's point of clarification if we have an officer explain that.
Sure, okay.
So in terms of vulnerability, so people who might be severely disabled, is it likely that those people will qualify for NDIS rather than the HACC PYP?
Councillor, yes, the people that are severely disabled are almost certainly going to qualify for the NDIS. Those with lesser disabilities are the ones that are likely to fall through the gap and would be eligible under the HACC PYP, which the report is suggesting council remain in that service provision.
So, sorry, maybe I didn't express my point of clarification well. So if we're talking about vulnerability, so people who would be particularly vulnerable, so may have particular disabilities, would be likely to qualify for NDIS, and without wanting to, who might be less disabled, to put it that way. It's probably not a particularly great way to put it, but they would be qualifying for.
Councillor, at the risk you're trying to draw me into the debate between the councillors,
I'm asking for
and you're asking for a definition on what severe and what lesser disabilities, and I'm not in a position to give you that, unfortunately.
Thank you, councillor.
That's disappointing now.
Okay, councillor Byrne.
Have you dealt with Councillor Nation's point of order?
Yes, we have. Rather than saying what they think, is what they said.
What they said, and so through our director's understanding, I think that what I said was fair and reasonable in terms of people who are eligible for the NDIS are not the ones that will be falling through the safety net.
That's fine.
Yep. Okay. And I don't really know why we're debating too much in terms of the hack PYP, because I think that that's like the trying to be the sugarcoat on the whole thing, because in the proposed motion that I just put up, that was actually point 4 as well. The debate has never been about whether we continue the state funding on the hack PYP services. It's always been in regards to the NDIS. So putting that in and talking fondly about how great that is I think just a bit of a standard. But anyway, so in terms of sorry, I just need a moment to gather my thoughts. Another thing that was mentioned was in terms of the community consultation. And again, I just want to touch on this one, because when you read through the community consultation, and as Councillor Nation mentioned, most things that were brought up was saying how hard the NDIS is. It's been difficult, people don't understand it, council need to be there for advocating. And there's no reason why we can't be a provider and advocating. We're doing that at the moment. So to say that we can't, again, I feel like it's just leading people up the wrong path, because it's not like we can't take that pathway. There are serious concerns with the community consultation that has occurred with people who are, I work in the disability sector, so I do this day in, day out. I hear on the ground what people are saying about the NDIS, especially where it's rolled out elsewhere. And one of the main things that I've been hearing is that people are getting their packages and then they're sitting there in no man's land for months and months and months before they can actually see a service. So if we pull out of this and people go, yep, great, we're going to move on to the NDIS, and then they're without a service, would you like your disabled relative not getting showered or looked after for a long period of time? We are here to look after the most vulnerable people, and I'm talking about the actual most vulnerable people, not the people that aren't eligible for NDIS, even though obviously we still want to help those people.
I have to wrap you up, councillor.
Could I please have an extension? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. In terms of NDIS being the way we change care and that we're not a specialist, I agree. This is the biggest reform that we've had since probably ever, and it is great. It is meant to be great, but it is new and there will be problems. And if anyone wants to sit here and honestly say that there are not going to be problems with this, I honestly think they're kidding themselves, because the issues that have already arisen through other municipalities are evident, they're on show, and I cannot sit here comfortably thinking that they're going to be our residents coming to us from October onwards saying, what do I do? And we can go, oh, well, we can work in the advocating space, but we can't actually provide you the service. I think we've got a little bit of leeway, but I don't know if that leeway is enough. There's no harm in signing up to the NDIS. We already have the staff. We're already providing the service. We have the most skilled staff. Might be a little bit biased, but we have extremely skilled, extremely trained staff that know them. And one final thing that I want to bring up, one of the reasons why we put it out to tender was so that people could continue the continuity of care that they've had for potentially the last 20 years. That was one reason why councillors around this table sat around here and said, we want to put this out to tender so we can pick up the staff, maybe someone else will take them and they'll be able to stick with the clients. What this is doing is it's saying, sorry staff, you can get moved to the age and disability, just the age sector. Say goodbye to the people that you've had, that you've looked after, that you've got your relationship with. See you later. And you won't see them again because they'll have to provide their own provider.
Thank you,
it's
councillor.
just abhorrent.
Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you. Look, again, I'll be speaking against the motion, and I will because, while words like stewardship and advocacy are wonderful and important, what to me is more important is, as I said, just pausing, maintaining the status quo for what might be a relatively short period of time and say, let's see how this plays out. And if it plays out that everyone goes and heads off to these wonderful private providers, then fantastic, wonderful, then we can make decisions around this. But what we are doing now is we are jumping into the abyss and having our fingers crossed and hoping for the best. And you know what? When it comes to the service provision for people who are dealing with a whole range of issues in their life, whose families are, I just cannot cross my fingers and hope for the best. What I would think is prudent is to turn around and say, Council will stay in this space for a period of time. We will see how it goes. We will monitor it carefully. And then as we go along and as we get more information, because we do not have enough information at this stage to make a decision to get out of this space, is my view. As I said, we had our tender process and we thought it would go a particular way, or there was an expectation it would, it didn't. And that is because there is so much uncertainty in this space. So how we can just turn around to our people with a disability and say, you know what, we're not even just going to provide you with a bit of a safety net, a bit of a fallback for a period of time. We're yanking that from underneath you. Primarily, I mean, it's not clear to me why people feel we should get out of this space. Is it financial? Is that what it is? Is that what it comes down to? Because that's the only thing. I've not heard anything in the debate that says, oh, council's got a really terrible reputation as being a service provider. We cannot provide these services. And the idea for me, on a personal level, that we would decide to not just wait and pause for a period of time purely for financial purposes, like that does not sit well with my ethics in any way. And again, I'm not suggesting, I don't know why other councillors are making their decision, but I've not heard yet a really compelling reason why we can't just pause and have that period of time to let this transition play out and then make informed decisions when we know that our people who live in our municipality with a disability will be appropriately cared for.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll be brief. I think there's been plenty of discussion about this so far. My only points would be that fear of change is quite normal and something that happens in our society constantly, and it's fear of the unknown possibly, but it's there, and fear does exist. Letting the dust settle on a new scheme is another aspect that needs to be taken into consideration. We can't just expect everything to be perfect from the get-go. It doesn't work in any process. There's always going to be a few teething problems, but there will be improvements. And it's improvements of the NDIS, and that's what it's all about. Better service and a not downgrading of the standard, but it's about improvement. Pausing and watching the grass grow around your feet, that's exactly what happens. The grass will just grow longer and nothing will change, nothing will improve, and we'll just end up, in fact, going backwards. So I can only applaud the fact that we have a new system coming into play, that it's about improving, getting better, and making the service better for those individuals that need it. As my final point would be that at the federal level, both sides of politics actually endorsed the NDIS, so it's a bipartisan issue. It's not one that needs fear or favour on either side. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Thrace, you're the only one left. Do you want to say a few words? Okay. Councillor Nation, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, probably just to say that I don't think any of us are sitting around these chambers not thinking that the way we are voting is not the best outcome for residents of this municipality. We come from differing views in terms of the people, the groups that are helping us form those views. But to suggest that anyone would be sitting around these chambers not wanting someone to go unwashed for 3 months is disrespectful, and it is...
Point of order, let's Mayor, I'm
Sorry.
just,
What's the point of order?
The point of order
Sorry?
was called on Councillor Byrne for this exact reason.
No, it wasn't.
So
No,
No.
Councillor
Talking
Byrne,
about-
Councillor Byrne
No.
was
I'm talking
stating
about what
what
she
she
stated.
thought, what other councillors think.
no, and
Councillor
it's been
Nation,
reflected back to
Councillor
No.
Nation is just referring to what was said in the
I'm
chamber.
wrapping up debate.
Well,
Thank you,
okay, I'll accept
Councillor
your
Marshall.
order, but
My
I'll interrupt.
point, Councillor Marshall, is that we are all sitting around here, hopefully making decisions for the right reasons. And we may come to different views, but we should have the best interests of our community at heart. Now, for me, I don't work in the disability sector, as some people do. So I've relied on a range of different people and groups to help form my opinion. That includes council officers, that includes my PAC group, because I'm not an expert in this space. And I do... An expert?
There is an expert, sorry.
Just because you work in an area, you're an expert?
Councillor Marshall,
I'm just
please refrain.
concerned of...
Let Councillor Nation
What
finish.
I'm saying is that everyone comes to this item with different views and different inputs. And I'd like to think that all of us would appreciate that we are voting and making decisions for what we think are in the best interests of people affected by the NDIS and the withdrawal from the of providing the services, or making the decision not to provide services under the NDIS. I'll leave it at that. I want to keep it respectful, and I would like to think that other councillors would have.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Sorais, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Lawrence,
All those against?
Councillor Marshall and Councillor Byrne.
The motion is passed. Council Report 9.3 on tonight's agenda is on page 42 and is entitled Adoption of Activities and General Amenities of Local Law 2018. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Nation.
I'll move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the item?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mayor. So this report seeks to formalise our activities and general amenities local law 2018. It's a document council is required under the Local Government Act to update every 10 years. The laws ensure the efficient management of council land while managing various permitted uses in line with community standards, and have been developed in accordance with the guidelines published by the Minister for Local Government. So we moved our draft activities and general amenities local law in February and put it out on public exhibition. We received 4 written submissions, but none wanted to present at a Section 223 meeting, so that wasn't required. The bulk of the local law is just updating the 2008 version to incorporate present-day matters that might not have been required or around in 2008. Some of that includes asset protection for building sites, noise controls, protection of mature canopy trees, operation of drones operating from council-managed land, the management of shopping trolleys, the establishment of permits required for various footpath activities, and managing designated smoke-free areas within the municipality. Obviously, there's been quite a change in that area in the past 10 years. I just did want to point out and clarify a few parts of this local law, because I know there has been some discussion circulating online, and that's in reference to the soliciting gifts, spruiking and busking. Now, these are not new items in this 2018 local law. In fact, they were part of Council's general local laws in 2008. And that's really important. So they've been slightly contemporised, if that's a word, but they existed in the 2008 document. We are not making any radical changes. We are just updating this document. I will also note that in the body of the report, there is a reference to begging. Begging is obviously a state government matter, so it's not actually formalised in our local laws, but it is referenced in the report. And I think that's important that that people who haven't taken the time to read the entire document, not suggesting councillors, but members of the community, that it is in essence just an updating of a 10-year-old document, which we are required to do under the Act.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't think I need to go through everything. I think Councillor Nation's covered everything. Suffice to say that there has been ample consultation and stakeholders have been considered in this bylaws. So, yes, I agree with what my fellow councillors have said. Thank you.
Any other councillor? Councillor Nation, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. My apologies. Council Report 9.4 on tonight's agenda is on page 48 and is entitled Adoption of Mobile Food Vehicle Policy. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a second? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm very happy to see that we've endorsing a position regarding food trucks within our municipality. There's certainly been a lot of toing and froing over the last few years with regards to how we can accommodate food trucks. They're certainly very popular, but obviously we also have to always take into account where they're located and the effect caused by them to traders and all the rest of it. So I'm very pleased to see this policy. I know we had quite a number of submissions to the draft. So, and I guess what Councillor Lawrence said before, there's always teething problems. So I expect there to be potentially some teething problems because it's a brand new policy. But I note that in the recommendation, we are to review it within 12 months' time to do a health check on it, I guess. So I look forward to that because I'm hoping there's not too many teething problems. But it's a great thing to actually have a policy and a purpose for where we want to go with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with everything my fellow Councillor Sharp said. This area of business within Moonee Valley needs a certain amount of admin and organising. Rogue trading has been rife and affecting local traders particularly, who pay rent rates and normal business outgoings that these traders, these mobile food vehicle traders do not. The need for appropriate standards and controls is good to see that we've got a draft plan for this. And the street trader program is efficient. That's via the program, the online program I'm talking about now, and it allows the mobile food van to do registrations online, which means they don't have to waste their time coming into council and all that mucking around. The review of the new policy is wise, given that this is a new area of Moonee Valley City Council policy control on mobile food vans. The safeguard for local fixed traders under the policy, per the policy 7.1.2, which states granting a permit will not materially affect local residents, local businesses or community generally. And I think that's important that there is that protection in place for the local businesses who inadvertently, by whatever means, are affected by these mobile food vehicles. So finally, I just would like to say that I'm pleased to see this report and recommend it to fellow councillors.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close? Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item is report 9.5 on tonight's agenda is on page 65, titled Draft Footpath Trading Policy. Councillor Sharp, would you like to leave? Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, just catching up here. Here we go. Where are you? Yes, I move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The draft footpath trading policy, to me anyway, is a far more equitable approach to the policy that Council currently has. and it's based on a shopfront width for those traders that wish to trade on the footpath. And it says that the larger the space used, higher the fee paid. So it's a sensible approach, but those traders that have only a small area in the front of their shops, then it gives that opportunity to not have to pay through the nose as opposed to those traders that have a large area and were under the current system, the smaller ones were being penalised. The new ground markers that will be used will help traders know where they can and cannot operate from within the footpath proper, and I think that's a good thing. It at least gives a presence of mind, not only for the traders but also for the consumer, the residents who are walking up and down the street to say, hey, what's that chair doing halfway across the footpath where I'm walking? There's your marker, move it back. So I think that's a fair and reasonable approach that council's taken. I've seen these markers used in other municipalities, and they're actually, you know, a nice looking marker that sits on the ground, and you can't trip on them, of course, and they make it very clear. Also, this draft footpath trading policy controls those charity collectors that we often have in our usual trading strips, and they can be a pest, as we all know. They get out of control, they get in your face, they do everything that you don't want them to do. But this brings them back into the fold, and we get rid of those pests that we don't really want. To me, this policy overall gives a clear and understandable process for footpath trading within the municipality.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Nation.
Only to say that this is in its draft form, so it is an evolving document. We definitely received plenty of pieces of feedback when it was moved in 2015. So definitely invite those that may be impacted and affected, or those with views on particular matters, to please provide feedback to council during the exhibition period to help us formulate a final policy.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close?
That's fine, thanks.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Councillor, thank you. I'll just wait for here she comes. Council report 9.6 on tonight's agenda is on page 72 and is entitled Draft Moonee Ponds Creek Chain of Ponds. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a second to Councillor Nation? Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Well, they say that good things come to those who wait, and we have certainly waited for this, but we have a good thing, which is very pleasing, although it does quite possibly have the worst title that just hardly rolls off the tongue, but is as it is. So, as noted, this has been quite a long process to get here, and the report actually sets out the chronology of the various steps that have gone through. And this came out of the hearings in relation to East-West Link, and it became very clear at that time that we needed a coordinated plan for the creek and for the areas surrounding it, and a holistic plan. I think one of the positives, as I said, acknowledging the time that it's taken, is that there have been some good, strong partnerships developed here. Certainly the fact that Moreland's on board is great, and I commend the officers for really encouraging that relationship. Melbourne Water, again, absolutely essential when you're talking about our waterways, so the fact that they have been so heavily involved, our wonderful friends of groups, and obviously the community members who have had input into this. So I think just very briefly, there are four categories of outcomes, I should say, which are set out in the particular document. They're social, environmental, economic and governance outcomes. And if you look through the document, there are some really quite clear outcomes that are hoped for as part of this. Just briefly, we're looking at promoting innovative water management, improving the ecological health, developing a vibrant and connected linear park, acknowledging and celebrating the wandering and cultural heritage of the creek, investing in green infrastructure projects, providing community health benefits through improved infrastructure, and also really importantly looking at how the governance should occur when you have multiple stakeholders. So the motion is for endorsing it to go out on consultation, and it's noted in there that if it is approved for consultation, it will be out from, I think it's the 14th of June to the 14th of August, and there will be consultation both in Moreland and Moonee Valleys. So for anyone who cares about our waterways, I really strongly encourage you to have a look through the document. It's got some really positive actions in there, and I hope to see real change.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. This is quite an exciting document, and while some people would think of Moonee Ponds Creek as just being a little concrete channel, it's one of our largest pieces of continuous open space and our longest off-road sustainable transport corridor. And there's a few initiatives in MV 2040 which reference the neighbourhoods of Flemington, Moonee Ponds, Essendon, Strathmore and Strathmore Heights that are then linked in with this draft plan. They include the revitalisation of Moonee Ponds Creek through naturalisation, flood mitigation, stormwater harvesting and reuse, the pedestrian and cycling linkages along the creek. We obviously have a master plan as well that this will help guide, and upgrades obviously to that trail, which is at the moment partially inaccessible and is ageing and needs some investment. So this ties in nicely with our draft MV 2040 strategy, and for those that take the time to download and read the document, it's quite a comprehensive but informative and exciting document.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The Moonee Ponds Creek, due to its modification and concreting, its water pathway became more of an open drain than, in parts, of course, than the creek that it once was. Now, most farmers will tell you that if you can control or slow your water flow through creek, river or stream, you're able to get a better vegetation growth, better environmental results, less erosion and greater animal and bird life attraction. And the Chain of Ponds report covers much of this kind of impact that farmers look for in the slowing of the water flow. The Chain of Ponds will also add extra benefits to our Moonee Valley area, and they're listed in the report from council officers, but I'll just quickly, the ecological health of the creek will be improved. It'll restore more natural waterway, resolve potential flood risk, acknowledge the local Wurundjeri heritage of the creek, and help protect and manage the creek, provide community health benefits via walking, cycling and jogging. Overall, better lifestyle for the Moonee Valley residents from Strathmore, Moonee Ponds, Ascot Vale and Flemington, and even for those in the west of our municipality, should they choose to come over and see what the Moonee Ponds Creek is like. It's good collaboration, as was already mentioned, with Melbourne Water. Finally, I'd just like to mention the history of the name Moonee Ponds and the Moonee Ponds Creek is actually stemmed from the fact that it was a chain of ponds when the first white man came into the area, and those chain of ponds appeared during the dry season, and that was part of the reasoning behind the name, although it was spelled M-O-N-E. There was also anyway, that's probably the best explanation that I could find anyway. But it's interesting that we're going back to where we started, which is great to see.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor to say a few words? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.7 on tonight's agenda is on page 78 as entitled New Lease Latitude Direction for Young People over part of the Flemington Community Centre. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, the report summarises the situation here. So Latitude were located at a property that council owned, and thankfully decided not to sell at this stage anyway, certainly. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I thought someone was asking something. No, that's right. So Latitude were relocated to the Flemington Community Centre, and this is essentially formalising that arrangement to provide a 3-year lease and a licence over common areas, if you like. And I think it's really important that we support an organisation such as Latitude. You look at the services that they provide, which are youth support and referral services for youth who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. So,
thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation, would you like to say a few words?
Just very briefly to stress the importance of supporting service providers in areas where council do not provide those services. Latitude obviously have had a quite a strong presence in Moonee Valley, and by the relocation to the Flemington Community Centre and keeping them within the municipality, will continue to serve those young people 16 to 25 that are either homeless or at risk of homelessness. And hopefully, I think if this is moved, it will be from the 1st of July for a period of 3 years.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors say? Councillor Soares.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of words. This organisation came up at the Principals' Breakfast I think it was last week or the week before, where they were talking about organisations that support youth and students from the age of 12 to 25. And it's just fantastic to see that we can provide this support to this group who do provide such a wonderful service to particularly our youth who don't know where to go and they don't have that outreach. So it's fantastic to see that the council are supporting them, and I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.8 tonight's agenda is on page 82 and is entitled Farnham Street Neighbourhood Learning Centre Incorporation Lease Renewal. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. I have a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Do I? Councillor Nation, seconder. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the item?
Look, only briefly, Councillor Nation referred in the previous matter to the importance of council supporting organisations that provide services council don't. And here is a great example of a centre which provides so much to so many with so little. So I think it's fair to say that of all of the many worthwhile organisations in Moonee Valley, Farnham Street ranks right up there. And I know anyone who has spent any time at the neighbourhood house just knows the warmth and the generosity of all of the staff, very ably led by Kathy Connop, of course. So it's my absolute pleasure in this instance to support the additional 3-year term.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation.
Just very briefly to note that they've been providing services to the community for near on 35 years. This will extend it to 38, and as Councillor Marshall said, they provide such a range of services to so many members of particularly that Flemington community. It's amazing what they can do with that limited space. It is basically just an old house, and as Councillor Marshall said, that it is a welcoming environment, and it is a lot of the time people's first interactions within that community, depending on what course or what activity they're taking part in. So we'll very warmly second this motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor say a few? Councillor Lawrence.
Again, very briefly, Mr Mayor, having had the pleasure of a tour through that facility earlier in the year, it was very welcoming. They certainly provide a diverse range of activities and courses and English-speaking classes and all sorts of things for a different range of clientele. And I can honestly say I was very impressed, and I've tried to see myself around a lot of these centres, and I think this is certainly one that I encourage other councillors to support.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor would like to say a few words? Councillor Marshall, would you like to close?
No.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.9 on tonight's agenda is on page 86 as entitled Response to Notice of Motion 2018-07 Park Run Course. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Serace. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The report really speaks for itself, and I know that around this chamber we spoke a lot about park run and safe running courses when I originally moved my original notice of motion on the 27th of March 2018. Just want to thank staff member Kate Heisenbuttle for putting this report back together so quickly to get it back. Is great. I know that she and her team did a lot of work on this, and they got some community input from local runners. And the outcome basically was that there are lots of different, 7 I believe, options to do a park run, but it really does need to be community driven, which again has been spoken about before. There's no doubt about that. But most importantly, like point 4 is where possible supports the community to develop a park run in Moonee Valley. So we're pretty much saying through this report, the door's open, guys. If you want to park run in Moonee Valley, we're all ears and happy to help. We've found 7 potential routes that look quite good. There's obviously various things that need to go into them. Parking, there's barbecues in some, the activation of local businesses, safety. But if the community does potentially want to go down the park run line, we can look into how to making the route even better. But on a side note from that, because it didn't necessarily just have to be park run, it's something that my PAC group and I have been, we touched on briefly at the last PAC meeting, was how much everyone loves walking around the river because it's a closed loop. Everyone just likes doing that loop of the river. And people feel that there's a lot of people out there a lot of the time, and it feels quite safe, and the lighting's not too bad and whatnot. And I think that because with our health and wellbeing plan, we really want to encourage this active participation where you don't have to be a member of a sporting club. You can go out and you can feel safe, and you can just walk and you can do your own loop. I really like the idea of the officers requesting to explore the provision of walking and running tracks in each of the neighbourhoods. Obviously, we have 13 neighbourhoods, and I think that everyone should be able to feel safe walking around in their neighbourhoods, around their local parks, areas, whether it's 5Ks for a park run. It doesn't have to be. It just has to be something that people can go around and feel safe. And I really think this is a lovely report, and I think that it's what councils should be doing. It will lead to something to make it a safe and happy place and healthy. We just want to be healthy, Mr Mayor.
Moonee Valley is a safer place over the last 12 months.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Serace.
Thank you. I really can't add much more to Councillor Byrne's great enthusiasm and excitement about this proposal. And once we get the feedback and the officers look at all the proposals that are being put forward, it'll be great to see it take place.
Thank you. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I feel like I'm the second fiddle in all this tonight. Anyway, look, I'm a great believer in walker, and I walk at least an hour every day with a considerable amount of weight on my back. That being the point, that we do have some marvellous places to walk in this municipality, and I do note Aberfeldy Park's listed in there, as well as the Afton Street Park, and you only need to go further up into the west of our municipality, into Rosehill Ward, and it's not listed here, but the Steeles Creek walk is a fantastic walk, probably one of the best we have on this side of town. You can walk through there and literally feel like you're in the middle of the bush. You would not know you're in the inner urban city of Moonee Valley. It is that good. So I'm sorry to see that it's not even listed here, but for those that are looking for that special walk, there's a great one up there, and a lot of runners go through there as well. Anyway, look, I applaud the move. I'm a bit of a solo walker, but those that like to move in groups are welcome to take up this offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Byrne, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just be quick. Steel Creek is on this one. Number 7, starting point at Keeler Road and heading to Rose Hill Road and return under the Keel or East. So it was picked up. But I absolutely, completely agree with you, Councillor Lawrence, that it is one of the most prized walking tracks in the municipality, and it's a bit of a hidden gem, and I think there's a lot of locals that quite like it that way. But it is also good, obviously we want to have a lot of use through all of our walking tracks. I'm really looking forward to bringing this to the PAC group, because I know that we have an enthusiastic group, and people want to hear about loops and want to have things lit and want to increase accessibility for all. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council Report 9.10 on tonight's agenda on page 101 is entitled Response to Notice of Motion 2017-04 on charity spruiking. Street charity spruiking. Councillors, do I have Councillor Nation?
Move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the item?
Just briefly, this report is a response to a notice of motion that I raised back in April 2017, which has helped shape our draft footpath trading policy. It's fairly straightforward, and the recommendation is obviously to note the actions taken to help address the issue of on-street charity spruikers. It's a somewhat fine line as a council to encourage community engagement and support while detracting from what they call chuggers or charity spruikers, and in particular down in Puckle Street, where some of the behaviour is, as it says in the report, quite predatory and quite aggressive. And we also know that in terms of the actual dividend that then returns to the charity, depending on if the people are on commissions or a contract payment, is quite hard to police. And even with council issuing permits, there are little loopholes which include people being on contract payment, so they can stress that all money raised goes to the organisation, or all that money taken goes to the organisation, but then get a contractual payment back. The draft footpath policy has addressed this somewhat, and is definitely something that we'll continue speaking about as a councillor unit, obviously, as we formulate that final footpath trading policy. The aim has never been to take away from the Scouts or the real community collectors, and that's really where we want our community's charity investment going. We want our community to be buying the box of Scout cookies or supporting the local football club, and investing that money directly back into our municipality, not investing that money into someone's wage which will then disappear out of the municipality. As I said, it's a fine line between creating controls where that can actually happen. The draft footpath trading policy obviously addresses it initially, but it is a moving beast, and we will see if there are any exceptions outside what has been moved in the footpath trading policy, where we think, this particular group will be caught up in this policy, and it is not a group that we want caught up in this policy, so how can we adapt it to have best fit within our community?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence.
No, I've got nothing further to add.
Any other councillor? Councillor Nation, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Council report is on 9.11 on tonight's agenda, is on page 105 and is entitled Notice of Motion 2017-22 Footpath Trading. Councillor Sharp is leaving the chamber. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Without sounding like we're repeating ourselves from the previous motion, this is a good protection for our consumers, residents, and not getting hit on by charitable organisations, but also allowing for the fact that we do have scouting groups, we do have guides, Rotary, Lions, CFA, CWA, and other footy, netball, bowls clubs that have raffles and so forth, as well as those in state and federal members and local councillors and so forth that wish to do some footpath interaction, shall we call it, without anybody being paid in the process. So I guess it's a continuation of the previous motion, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nation, would you like to say a few words?
Just to note that the original, the 2015 version of the footpath trading policy was very black and white, and it did create some anomalies, in particular to those local non-profit groups, particularly those that just want to set up a stall. And as noted in the report, this hopefully has been addressed in that draft footpath trading policy. Again, I'll reiterate as per that item when it was moved that we definitely seek feedback on that policy to help formulate a final document to stand for the next 3 years.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor like to speak to the item? Councillor Lyons, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this is a good protection for our residents and for our local volunteers, and hopefully that's exactly what it's aimed to do, and that's exactly what it should do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll just wait for Councillor Sharp to return to the chamber. Council Report 9.12 on tonight's agenda is on page 108 and is entitled Report of Assembly of Councillors. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could I please move the officer's recommendation? But could I please just note here, and I'm happy for you to someone to advise me on the wording, but regarding page 109, conflict of interest, Councillor Ralph Sharp declared a conflict of interest in item 1, footpath trading policy, but as she was participating via conference call, she did not take part in the discussion on this matter. I actually called in after this matter was spoken about. Could that please be clarified?
Yep.
'Cause
that's fine.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sorais, do you agree to the minor change, Councillor Sorais? I do. Thank you. Councillor Sharp, would you like to speak to the item?
Just a procedural matter, so happy.
Thank you. Councillor Sorais, would you like to say a few words?
No.
Any other councillor like to say a few words? Councillor Sharp, would you like to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item on tonight's agenda is notices of motion. Councillors, the next item is on page 113, and the notice of motion we have two notices of motion from Councillor Sorais listed tonight. Therefore, I call on Councillor Sorais to present her first notice of motion, 10.1, entitled CCTV Mobile Trailer. Councillors, I'll need a seconder actually first.
You need to read the motion. Read the motion.
Okay, read the motion first. Yeah,
Thank you.
No, you're right.
So, take notice of the ordinary meeting of Council to be held on the 12th of June 2018. It is my intention to move that Council follows the initiative taken by Stonnington City Council and applies for a grant from the Victorian Government's Public Safety Infrastructure Grants, in brackets PSIG program, for the purchase of a CCTV mobile trailer to be used by Victoria Police to assist in crime prevention and to enhance safety within the City of Moonee Valley. There are slight changing of the words I've put in, changing from rights to the state and federal members of Parliament seeking a grant. I have changed to applies for a grant from the Victorian Government's Public Safety Infrastructure Grants.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sorais, would you like to speak to the item?
Yes. This came about from an article I was reading actually with regards to Stonnington Council, who received federal funding for $100,000 for a trailer, a CCTV trailer to support, basically adhering to sort of extra safety measures within the community. So they are the first local government organisation to introduce the mobile unit in Victoria. The unit has 4 cameras and can be remotely controlled by police. Based on recent years of high-profile armed robberies, home invasions and carjackings that have caused concern in our community, the trailer-mounted camera would be an effective crime-fighting tool, as it could be used where it's most needed to help make our local community safer. I have done some homework, if you want to put it that way. So I've made inquiries through the Moonee Ponds Police, who have made inquiries themselves with the Malvern Police and can confirm that they have been provided with a CCTV trailer by Stonington Council. Stonington Council successfully obtained the federal government grant for the purchase of the trailer for use by police for local crime issues. And the trailer is owned by council but is deployed by the local police. The trailer has not yet been deployed, so they're unable to give any feedback about its results. And as it is mobile, it could be used for any crime, trend / issues within the council area. It could also be used to monitor events and demonstrations. The trailer is marked and would also provide deterrence value in areas with known crime issues. So the Moonee Ponds Police are going to have ongoing engagement with Malvern to see what it will have as an impact in the area. The Victorian Government has recently opened its annual Public Safety Infrastructure Grants program, and the grants are available between $20,000 and $250,000 per application, and these are due by the 20th of July. The PSIG program provides funding for Victorian councils to address local community safety issues through the delivery of infrastructure to improve safety, security, and build confidence in public spaces. Officers recommend a council grant application to the PSIG program rather than writing letters to the state and federal members of Parliament to seek the grant, and hence why I tweaked the wording on that. Council officers will meet with the Victoria Police and officers from Stonington City Council during June to examine the potential for a CCTV mobile trailer as one option for a PSIG grant application. The feasibility and value of a range of other potential projects that may be equally important, such as lighting and amenity improvements for laneways in Moonee Ponds and other activity centres, railway stations and transport hubs, will also be explored. So it's about implementing safety measures throughout the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Safety is a very big issue in our society. We were only just talking before about walking, running, jogging around the Maribyrnong and the safety issues that people like to ensure that there is that safety in particularly women. I don't use that as a sexist comment, but one that needs to be considered in our modern society. This will be a very useful tool for the work of our local police, and one that I'm sure they'll be able to utilise for festival events that Moonee Valley may hold, as well as other situations where large numbers of people are going to be congregating. And we can think of one that's coming up very shortly, the soccer match between Australia and France up at the East Keeler Centreway, where we'll have hopefully a good turnout, and that's not too cold. But the point being that where there's large numbers of people, you want that little bit of extra safety, and if the police can get some advantage by using this tool, then why the heck shouldn't we use it? And I'm sure they are in agreement on that very point. The other point that I make, that this is not affecting the ratepayers' purse. For once, we're not saying to our ratepayers, please cough up, we want you to fund this. No, it's all about putting a decent grant in to the state government through that fund, and trying to hopefully get some funding, a grant for funding of this. It's not coming out of our usual council budget. So I applaud the initiative, and I think that other councillors hopefully would do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other Councillor Nation?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I have concerns over this motion, and I have concerns over the practicality of the use of CCTV given our municipality. Stonington Council's, while located in a probably similar or distance from the city as our council, they already have an existing CCTV network. It's 10 cameras, it runs down Chapel Street, which is the one real hotspot in that municipality. And Paran Police Centre actually has active monitoring. They actually have a little CCTV hub where the police actively monitor activities on a Friday, Saturday night. And obviously if there's trouble, can look at footage and help to hopefully catch the offenders. The trailer that Stonington Council have is an additional 4 cameras that, from my reading, feeds into that existing network of 10 cameras. So it expands their 10 camera network, either to side streets or further up Chapel Street, and again, they're actively monitored. Now in Moonee Valley, we don't have an active CCTV network, and we do know, particularly Flemington Police Station is somewhat under-resourced, and at the moment would not have the capacity to set up a CCTV hub and actually monitor screens. We also have not one particular hotspot that sees trouble on a Friday or Saturday night like Stonington does. And I note mentions of home invasions and burglaries, but the idea that a trailer could somehow capture people creating home invasions or breaking into homes, I don't think is overly warranted. I note the idea about the concept about use at public events, and obviously we had the recent issue down at Kensington/Flemington when Milo Yiannopoulos visited. But again, that wasn't Flemington Police responding, that was actually the critical response team responding. So Flemington Police didn't have a presence, and that was actually an issue there, but they didn't have a presence. It was taken over, obviously, with the pecking order of the critical response team. I think the officer comments here provide a much better pathway in that the evidence that we often receive from police down in Flemington is ideas like lighting and that passive surveillance are actually more so deterrents than a CCTV network, particularly when either council or the police in this area don't have the physical means to actually actively monitor it 24/7.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other Councillor Marshall?
I have a few points to make, and I acknowledge Councillor Sorais having amended the motion to reflect that obviously members of Parliament don't administer these grants processes. I suppose one of the big concerns I've got, we're looking at process things, is I'm looking at the guidelines now. And the guidelines says mobile CCTV systems will not be funded. So I suppose for me, it's not necessarily a motion that I could support if I know it's going to fail, because the guidelines themselves indicate that mobile CCTV systems will not be funded. So I would just put that out there from a process perspective. I suppose the other thing I've got concern about from a process perspective is that whether this is actually ultra vires, because our meeting procedures require that we can't commit council to expenditure of more than $5,000 through a notice of motion. Now
this is a grant, just for clarification.
Yeah, so it's been my experience, more often than not, I'm happy for officers to correct me, that we are required to contribute. It's very rare that we get a grant that doesn't require some level of co-funding. And again, in the guidelines themselves, they say that the council has to, for CCTV, again acknowledging that we can't apply for mobile funding, Council has to take ownership or basically responsibility for maintenance. Sorry, it's all in here. So basically we've got to say that, yep, we will be responsible for the maintenance and ongoing operation of that, which again certainly comes at a cost, and a quite significant cost, I would expect. So that, again, if I'm looking at just purely process, I'm not sure how that can happen given our meeting procedure protocols. I think too, and Councillor Nation has touched on a couple of my concerns, there are lots of projects that we could potentially apply for a grant through this that would meet the funding guidelines and criteria, including potentially the lighting, that sort of thing, that we do know. We've had people speak with us and our officers are well versed in the types of things that, regardless of who you are, gender-wise or age-wise or whatever it might be, that lighting and things like that can really enhance your feeling of safety. The other thing that's, I suppose, missing from me is, while it's great that there's been an initial discussion with the Moonee Ponds Police, monitoring CCTV footage is resource intensive. It requires lots of resources, and we have had our local area command come and brief us and tell us that essentially Moonee Ponds, Moonee Valleys, I should say, we're very lucky to live in a safe part of Victoria, and they reiterated to us that that was the case, and that we have decreasing levels of crime. So my big question is, in that context, when we've had our local area command come and tell us that we live in a safe part of the world, would they be willing to dedicate very large amounts of time and resources to a mobile CCTV trailer? And it certainly would not, based on that, from the decision makers themselves, I don't think that that would be the case. So while I certainly commend anything which looks at how we might improve that perception of safety, and that, again, there are lots of projects that we could potentially fund, the difficulty is we can't actually do this because the guidelines don't allow it. And then, again, the research, and once you start getting into this, it's one of those black holes, the research around the effectiveness of CCTV is probably at best mixed in terms of its effectiveness as a tool for the prevention of crime. So I think that's probably where I'll leave it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors like to say a few words? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll applaud Councillor Sorais for putting this notice of motion up, because I know it's all about safety and keeping our residents just safe. But I have a few concerns with it, and one was particularly regarding the grants process, and I think Councillor Marshall has clarified that, because other than them not accepting these types of grants through this public safety infrastructure grant program, most of the time you do have to put money towards it. So I guess I'd prefer to see something like this come to us in a report, which details why we would need it and how we would go about facilitating it. I dare say that there'd have to be MOUs organised between the police, and we don't have just one police station, we've got at least three. So I think it's a great initiative, but I think there just has to be a lot more meat put to the bone. I think we've just got the bone at the moment, and there's just a lot more meat to go around it before we can sort of evaluate it in its complete form in order to make the best decision.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Byrne, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm a little bit confused with this one, because I actually I didn't mind it, and then I obviously read the officer's comments, and then I noted that Councillor Sorais acted upon the officer's comments effectively and changed the notice of motion, probably not realising that that was actually then making, but that it weren't eligible, I suppose, for the grant. So I'm not sure whether the mover and seconder want to potentially change anything in there now, knowing that, because you might not have realised, I'm assuming, until the debate started, that was the case.
Yes.
Yeah, so based on the information that has been brought to light at the table, I was going by the officers' comments who were not supporting the notice of motion based on them stating that the Victorian Government has recently opened its Public Safety Infrastructure Grants program and grants are available, and I would have assumed that the officers would have been aware that we can or we cannot apply for grants. So this information has just been brought to light to me. So I am happy to say that we write back because Stonington received their funding through a federal grant. So I'm happy to...
So this is a state...
That's what I changed it to, but initially, as I said, my original notice of motion that I was going to move was that we follow the initiative from Stonington Council and write to state and federal members. Well, I'm happy to leave it at federal members of Parliament seeking a grant for the purchase of a CCTV mobile trailer, given what's been brought to light in the debate.
Councillor Byrne, would you like to finish?
So, sorry, so are we keeping... So you're not moving any in... There's no...
No changes.
No changes, so it is as is. I'm still a little bit... I actually like the principle of the safety in the whole thing, and I feel like there's been, maybe due to lack of time, because there's obviously the time constraints being the 20th of July, or whenever it was, 20th of July. And I'm someone who loves the idea of grants and putting in for them, but I just don't think, as Councillor Sharp has said, it hasn't really been fleshed out well, but maybe even... I really don't know where we go to from here. But I obviously, now knowing what I know, I can't support what's on the screen because we know that we're not eligible for the CCTV mobile trailer. We know we can't get that, so it makes it sort of redundant. But I feel for you, and I see where you're going with this, and maybe there has to be another notice of motion or something put forward so that we can still apply for the grant, but potentially for the lighting or something else, or something that we're eligible for, because if we know we're not going to get this, it sort of makes it just redundant.
Councillor Serace, would you like to close?
I did indicate that I would be happy to revert to what I had originally put in my notice of motion, and that was that we write to the federal members of Parliament seeking a grant for the purchase of, given what had been brought to the debate at the table.
I think because everyone's spoken on it now, I think what we'll do is we'll just vote on this one, and then if you want, maybe sometime in the future we can come back with another notice of motion, which has a lot more clarification.
All right, well, I'll close my debate anyway,
Okay.
which is what I'm entitled to do.
I'd just also like to say a few words.
Point of clarification.
That's the motion. That's the motion, yeah. I'd also like to say a few words. I've been in the council for over 13 years, and CCTV was brought up many, many years ago when we did have a lot of trouble down Mount Alexander Road down there with all the nightclubs. But, the one bar and all that. But I think our local police have done a magnificent job in cleaning up this whole area, and that's why I believe Moonee Valley is a far safer place these days than it was before. The only concern that I have with following another council, I mean, I don't think is necessarily what's right for one council is right for everyone. And I do agree with you, CCTV would be a great idea, but I'm really concerned about the ongoing cost and the monitoring of it afterwards. I know Stonington, are using this trailer for like Councillor Nation said, down Chapel Street, where there is a great need for it. But the only thing I worry about these mobile ones is, I mean, who are we going to be targeting with this? I mean, this could be seen as a very awkward situation, where we could target certain groups of people, and I just feel a bit uncomfortable having a mobile spy system running around Moonee Valley. So, thank you, councillors. But I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Oh, sorry.
I know you won't go home. Just in response to some of the comments that were made, and I get a gist of where this is going, but I still would like to make a response to those. Whilst we don't have any active CCTV network within our municipality, it's basically just a support network to provide further safety measures, and that was the intent of what I was trying to achieve here. There were concerns over the motion about the practicality use of the CCTV, and it was stated that, yes, it is in usage at places like Chapel Street or whatever. As I said, my discussion with Moonee Ponds Police has basically said that they were going to engage with Malvern Police Station to see how that was tracking. As I said, it hasn't been put out there as yet, but they were looking at waiting to see once it's been deployed that they could see and get some feedback. And whilst it's all very well to apply for lighting and amenity improvements, that doesn't actually capture any offences that take place. And so therefore having a CCTV camera in place would help to be able to identify offenders and maybe deter offenders in our community. So the intent was basically to provide more safety and more security within our community, such as at greater events, etc., where the police don't have the resources and manpower to cover all those areas, and this was a way of doing that. So that's all I've got to say. The debate's taken place. Thank you.
Councillor, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Councillor Sorais, Councillor Lawrence,
All those against?
Councillor Sharp, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sypek and Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, councillors. I call on Councillor Sorais to print her second notice of motion entitled Proposed Amendments to the Civil Recognition Policy. Councillor.
Thank you. It is my intention to move that Council amends the civic recognition policy to include the provision of refreshments or hospitality for attendees at the conclusion of ceremonies which are held to recognise the achievements, service and commitment of outstanding individuals who have made a significant contribution to the Moonee Valley community.
Thank you, councillor. Do I have a second? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Sorais would like to speak.
Thank you. In September 2013, there was a review of the civic recognition policy, and the resolution was, it was recommended that the revised policy, in line with changing nature of requests for recognitions and commemorations that Council received. The amendments outlined the background, purpose, scope, definitions, responsibility, policy, process, forms of recognition, commemorative plants or trees, private memorials. But there was no inclusion for the provision of hospitality for attendees that had been addressed, and so therefore I'm seeking for this to be consistent in the policy across any current or future recognitions of people in the community.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Sharp.
I'll note that the policy was first endorsed back in 2013, so I dare say it's not far off being re-looked at by a councillor group, but I'm happy to support this notice of motion. I think it's a little loophole, if you'd like to call it, that's in the current policy that I think certainly warrants closing. Thank you.
Councillor Marshall.
I just had a point of clarification on that, well, the line you're saying, because I looked at the policy today and it said it's due for review, I think it's the 24th of September, which is a matter of months away. So I wonder, Councillor Sorais, whether it might be better to just do a broad review or capture this up in that broad review of the policy that will need to occur in accordance with the time frame set out in that policy.
Yeah, I probably, Mr. Lancaster, would you be able to just say a few words on this? That we're doubling, we might be doubling up if we just do it in September.
Certainly, as Councillor Marshall stated, it is up for review, so we will be reviewing it. Yes, that's correct.
So, Councillor Sorais, do you think probably if we could wait a month or two, because that way we can do a broad review of it all rather than doing this one portion of it, but because we'll be doing it in a couple of months' time again?
I have no issue with it. My motion says that we amend the civic recognition to include the provision. I haven't put any dates on there. I'm just saying that when it's reviewed, if it's September, that's fine, but that we include a provision for refreshments or hospitality for attendees. I have no issue with that. That's fine.
I reckon we leave that for the officers to give us a full recommendation. But that's just my thoughts. Anyway, Councillor Marshall, continue.
Oh no, sorry, that was a point of clarification.
Okay. Any other councillor like to say a few words?
Can I ask for just a point of clarification in terms of what the current, what we currently do? Because obviously there's a bit of miscommunication. Is it up to discretion?
Mr. Lancaster, would you?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, clearly the lines of the policy don't reflect any refreshments or ceremonies after that, so it's clearly just the installation of a plaque or a tree and that's what's been the case in most of the ones we've done in the past.
Thank you, Mr Lancaster. Any other councillor? Councillor Sarace, would you like to close?
No, you can put the vote. Thank you.
I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Next item on tonight's agenda is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business tonight? No? Confidential reports. The next item of business is confidential reports. Councillors, we have one confidential report this evening. Councillors, do I have a motion that the meeting go into camera to consider the matter which contains information relating to other matters? Councillor Lawrence. Do I have Councillor Sarace? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Councillors, officers and members of the gallery, that concludes all our business on tonight's agenda. Thank you for listening out there in live stream audience and for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Good night and God bless.